Welcome everybody to In the Spotlight, and with me I've got sports commentator, supremo, university lecturer. I can call you that now, Gary, can't I? Gary Taphouse.
Hi.
Gary, thanks for joining me on this, and we've known each other for 10 years because yesterday I was watching some old videos of a show that we first met. Do you remember it very clearly in South Africa?
How could I forget, mate? How could I forget? South Africa, 2 hours outside Cape Town on the coast, in the middle of nowhere, in a honeymoon destination, recording a TV show, the most surreal few weeks of my life. I was picked up from the airport a long time before you got there and taken by some stranger on some wild goose chase, having not spoken to anyone about the project. And I just thought, where am I being taken? Am I being kidnapped? And I ended up in this, very beautiful hotel, but obviously right opposite a fish canning factory. The place stank. Smelly Point. It was called Shelley Point, but we obviously named it Smelly Point. And there I was as the football expert for this Budweiser show. And to be honest, I don't think they really knew what to do with me after a while, because it wasn't really about football.
You had the easiest job on that ever. So anybody who watches this show had 32 fans from every single country of the World Cup, representing their country, living in this hotel together. So I was representing England, and we were part of this reality experience, but it was sold to us like it was going to be like the most amazing football experience ever, going to all the games, meeting all the players. Now, going to all the games, I only went to one. You went to quite a few, Gary, didn't you?
The first one I went to was France against Tunisia, which was 0-0. I then got to go to the England-Algeria game, which I think you went to, 0-0. Which was 0-0. And one of the worst games I've ever been to in my life.
Ever.
And then, to be honest, I'd kind of lost my appetite for it after that. It was totally surreal. In the end, they got me doing the voiceover for the show just so I was actually being used, because I was just there on a kind of solo holiday. It was very, very strange.
It was. I remember one of my memories from that, Gary, and from you, not only was ranting at half-time of the England-Germany game about the goal that should have been given and Frank Lampard's shot at the crossbar, but it was also when we had to play this Fanatics football and you were commentating, and I had a bit of an England moment, if you remember, and I missed the deciding penalty in the semi-finals, and I'll never forget your commentary on that moment ever. And it still haunts me, Gary. It still haunts me.
And you having to do a fashion show as well, where you had to get some costume relating to your country, and you just wrapped yourself in a cheap England flag, I seem to remember. That was pretty lame.
It was. Do you know what, Gary? I'll give you an insight on that. I absolutely hated it. I was in a really bad mood that morning. I think I'd had about 2 hours sleep, was on a Budweiser hangover for the 30th day in a row, and I just didn't want to do anything. So I just ended up stripping and spraying cans of Bud everywhere. Yeah.
How vulgar.
Vulgar. You won't see me doing anything like that anymore. So Gary, anyway, football commentator. I know that it all started for you. You were studying journalism, if I'm not mistaken. Can you talk us through the journey? Was football commentary like a dream for you? Is that something you aspired to be when you were younger?
Yeah. Going back to Italia 90, which has been replayed on the TV this weekend, hasn't it? Watching all of those games. I think I watched every match of the tournament when I was 14, and that was the first time I thought, you know what? You can actually commentate on football for a living. I was listening to Motti and Barry Davis and all of those guys, just thinking, this is their job. They get to just go to football matches and commentate on it for a living. I really want to do that. So every decision I took from there onwards was with that in mind, with that dream in mind. So the A levels I took, the choice of university, and of course you need a lot of luck along the way. I was very fortunate that I was living at the time. In my third year, I was living with this girl and a few others, and she was going out with an older guy who was a cameraman for a local production company, and they were filming all of AFC Bournemouth's games because I was at uni in Bournemouth, and they were obviously third tier at the time. They ramshackle old Dean Court Stadium. They couldn't afford much. They just hired this local production company to film their matches, and they needed a commentator to do all the home matches. Anyway, I heard him chatting about this when he was round our student house, and he was saying, the guy they're using to commentate, he doesn't work for the club. He was a vice president, so he obviously put some money into the club, but he was commentating, but he was really biased and quite ranty. And they said he was a great guy, but he wasn't really appropriate to what they were trying to do. So I just raced in and said, hello, I'll do that. Give me a go, please. And he did. They took me to Bournemouth against Bristol Rovers, which was a midweek game. And it went quite well. Bournemouth won 2-1. I can remember it was just one single camera on a little old gantry, me next to it with just a normal microphone plugged into the camera. And yeah, they said, do you want to do some more? I ended up doing the whole of that season, and then I wrote and presented the end of season VHS tape. Remember those? At the end of each season, which was sold in the club shop, and they sold them in HMV in Bournemouth. And I remember walking in and seeing it on display, just thinking, wow, I wrote that, I presented that. And by the way, I presented it in the most cheesy way imaginable, because they'd gone through some terrible financial despair that season. And I held up the opening shot of the VHS is me holding up 2 cherries hanging on a piece of cotton. And my voiceover is, here are cherries hanging by a thread. And for most of this season, Bournemouth were hanging by a thread financially. And it was that was the level at which I wrote it. But it was great because I left uni with that VHS, with me commentating, and it just gave me some tangible proof that I could do it. So I then, with cutting a long story short, my first job was a reporter on the South London Guardian, news reporter. And they sent me to cover the launch of Crystal Palace Radio. They launched this AM service covering every home game. And I went to the first game. It was in one of the executive boxes, and I listened to the commentary, and it was okay. I just remember thinking I could do better than that. So I said to them, would you be interested in using me as a commentator? Here's my video. See what you think. And they said, yeah, give it a go. And the first game was Palace-Chelsea, 1997. It went quite well. I ended up doing about 3 seasons of Palace home games before I approached Capital Radio and said, look, I've been doing this. I've been covering one of the teams that you cover. Any chance of doing some games? And they said, yeah, absolutely. And that's where my journey started. So it's a long old road.
What I want to do is ask you how many of those VHSs, apologies, sadly, I remember them as well. Excuse me. How many of those VHSs did you buy?
No, I was a student, mate. I couldn't afford them. They gave me 1 copy. And funnily enough, my best man managed to get hold of it for my wedding. And they played the scene of me taking a penalty when I was queuing up one of the games. I was wearing beige chinos and some horrendous Bournemouth training top, and they played.
Gary's dress sense hasn't changed too much.
Hasn't changed. To be fair, One Direction would have loved those chinos, but I was about 20 years too early. They played that scene in his wedding speech, and I have never seen the VHS again since then. It went missing. That was 2003, so I have never seen it in the last 17 years. But it was that was fantastic experience. I didn't get paid a penny for it, but it was just fantastic experience. And without that, I don't think I would ever become a commentator.
Do you think so much of opportunities in sport, whether at commentator level or presenter or anything like that, you really have to take chances and do stuff that you wouldn't necessarily want to do, i.e. for free or for very little money, just to build your experience up?
I think everyone does that. everyone will tell you there's a bit of luck, but you also have to grasp that luck and take advantage of it. I could have been terrible doing that commentary, and they might have just said, look, this isn't for you, and that would have been the end of the dream, you know. But I did actually put a lot of work into it. I prepped properly, and it went okay. And obviously, you know, moving on to Capital, where I was working for Jonathan Pierce, and he had very, very exacting standards, and he would ring me up on a Monday and say, I liked what you did there, I didn't like what you did there, you've got to get better at that. And you know, he gave me some pretty brutal feedback over the years, but it definitely made me a better reporter, a better commentator. And from there, I moved on to work for Opta, the stats guys, and I would do broadcasting at the weekends for Capital. So I had full-on weeks. But finally, a job came up, a new radio station, a digital radio station launching at Chelsea Football Club, called Big Blue, and I applied for that and got it. And I ended up commentating for Chelsea every game, home and away. We travelled with the team everywhere, all around Europe. It was amazing, for about 6 years. And of course, that was the time when Abramovich bought the club, so I was there when all of those signings happened. I was actually in the boardroom for some of them. For example, when Sebastian Veron signed, I was there as he put pen to paper, and there was a big kerfuffle about his squad number. We thought maybe the deal might go because he wanted a particular number and it was already taken. The chief executive was ringing players saying, can he have this number? So, you know, I could write a book on that.
Why were you there? Why were you in the boardroom?
Because although I wasn't a club employee, it was the club's own station. So we were there to get the first interviews with Chelsea TV. So I would always be there hanging around, waiting to get those first interviews so we could play them on the station. It was a 24-hour station. It wasn't like some little match day station. It was 24 hours a day. So we were always on air, a lot of automated music, but, you know, we could always cut in at any point to break news. So again, great experience for me. There was only a handful of us that worked on the station, so we did everything. And again, really great experience. Of course, I then, doing that job, going to all the Chelsea games, I got to know people like Rob Hawthorne, Martin Tyler, people that worked at Sky. And I asked for their advice, and they'd listen to some of my commentaries. And eventually, they put me in touch with the producer that did Football First, as it was. It's now called Match Choice. And after a lot of badgering, a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails, a lot of text, a lot of Martin and Rob giving him a nudge as well, he finally gave me a go. In 2005, April 2005, it was Fulham against Manchester City. That was my first game for Sky. I was 29 years old. I've never been more nervous in my entire life. I thought I was going to throw up on the gantry about 10 minutes before we went on air. I was with Nigel Spackman. Claudio Reyna scored for Manchester City, so this gives you an idea. His son's now playing in the Bundesliga, so shows how old I am. And then Luis Boamorte equalised for Fulham, and that was the start of it, really. That went quite well, and then they said, we'll give you another game before the end of the season. Unfortunately, that one didn't go well. It was Aston Villa, Manchester City, and it was a day of disasters. I could write a book on this. I'll make it brief, but this is what happened. I came out of my house and my car had been stolen. That was the first disaster. So I thought, okay, I live quite near East Croydon Station. I'm going to get the train to Aston Villa. That's easy. Got to Euston, got a ticket, sat on the train. Suddenly everything went dark, and there'd been a massive power outage, and no trains were leaving Euston for the foreseeable future. So I rang my wife, and because she was a bit calmer, I was panicking, and she said, get the tube to Watford Junction and you can pick up a train from there to get you to Birmingham. So I did that, got down to the Metropolitan line, and there were engineering works, no tubes. So at this point, I was really panicking, and I rang my producer. This is my second game, remember. I rang the producer and said, look, I'm still in London. And he was like, you should be in Birmingham by now. I said, I'm still in London. There's no trains. He said, get a cab. Just do anything you can to get a cab to Watford Junction. That cost in itself about 100 quid, I think. And then I picked up a mini cab at Watford Junction all the way to Birmingham. It was 550 quid, I think. And I know, it was insane. Sky paid it. But there were roadworks on the M1 and there was no traffic moving. And I said to the driver, look, I'm commentating on this game. I've got to be there. Can you do something? And, you know, it was like a TV show. He went through the cones, down the hard shoulder, and just bombed it 100 miles an hour down the hard shoulder up the M1. And somehow we got to within a mile or two of the ground at about 20 to 3. You couldn't get any closer because they closed the road. So it was a really hot day. This was end of April, beginning of May. And I got out of the car and I ran as fast as I could to the ground. Rob Palmer, who was La Liga commentator at the time, was there for Soccer Saturday. So he was in vision. He could have stepped in had I not made it. But of course, he hadn't done any prep for a commentary. So he was not hoping. He was hoping I would make it. And I ran up to the trucks at 2:45, sweating, totally disorientated, all over the place. They said, get up to the gantry. We're on air in 5 minutes. Just as I was with Gary Birtles, who thought this was all hilarious, no sympathy whatsoever. They said, cue Gary, and at that precise moment, a massive gust of wind just blew all of my notes away down the stand. So all of the cues I'd given them for the teams I couldn't remember them. I couldn't remember them at all. So I just had to ad-lib. And in my ear, I could hear the World Feed director saying, what is he doing? What is he saying? That's not what he told us. And, I was this close to just crying at that point. And of course, there was a goal in the first minute, which was the last thing I needed. But I think it finished 4-2. It was quite an exciting game. And at the end of it, I was so close to passing out. And Sky actually sent a car to take me all the way home from Birmingham back to South London. And it was the most exhausting experience of my life. But I got through it. The commentary was actually okay. I never want to listen to it, but it was okay. And so, from there, that's it. I've been commentating ever since. But obviously, it could have been very different if I'd not made it that day.
I mean, that's an unbelievable story. Not just one thing to go wrong, for all that to go wrong, and then to still get there, but still have to be professional, do your job. And that's the thing, I guess, you're a sports commentator. You can't pause in between. You can't have a rest. You can't have a break. It's live. It's happening. It's real life. You just have to go for it, whatever the circumstances.
Yeah.
That's quite something, that, Gary.
A lot of the problems that we have as commentators are for quite some time, because you often have to stay where you are for half time as well. So there's a lot of tactical toilet breaks, mate. You have to think very carefully. When do I go for a wee? Because if I need to go during the game, I can't unless I'm going to wet myself. So that a lot of what you do is thinking, right, I need to go, make sure I go then. Don't drink too much before the game. Quite often you'll get to 20 minutes and think, I really need to go. And there's nothing you can do about it at all. Nothing Gary, whatsoever.
So what you're saying is commentators are like professional athletes. They have to prepare their fluid intake before their performance. For peak
totally. Yeah. For different reasons. There's no comfort breaks. In fact, I remember I was at Birmingham against Chelsea, actually. This would have been about 2008, I guess. And when you're on the Birmingham gantry, you can't get down at half time because for health and safety reasons. There's a rickety old ladder that takes you up. And they don't put it down at half time. And I was sitting next to the commentators from L'Equipe, the French TV station. And the commentator went to me, can we go to the toilet at half time? I said, no, you're stuck here. And he said, well, I can't last. So he just pulled out an Evian bottle and did it in the bottle right in front of everyone. The glamour of television right there. We always have to have that in mind.
Yeah, it's interesting. Right. So Gary, I'm getting my phone out and I'm getting my phone out for a reason, because you don't as a commentator, and I know certainly for Sky, you do the commentary stint, and then you often have to then go and interview the managers, right?
Yeah.
I remember you telling me about a story where you were waiting in line to interview a certain Roy Hodgson.
Yes.
Right? And
oh God,
I'm just going to play this video. All right, it's a minute.
Where's against Bolton? This is
right. I'm going to play it. Hold on. Where is it?
Roy, satisfying day at the office for you?
Yes, very. I thought we played very well. We were rocked back by another decision which I find hard to accept, but luckily... Which one do you think?
I'm asking you.
No, well, I'll leave it then. If you're going to be tricky like that, I won't even bother to carry on. Shall we? Let's stop it here, shall we? I mean, if you're going to be tricky with your questions.
No, I'm genuinely
asking. Well, let's start again. Which one? Well, how many were there? They only had 2 shots at goal. One was a penalty, and one was a strike at goal our goalkeeper saved. So what decision are we talking about?
Okay.
So let's not take the piss here.
I certainly wasn't.
Well, I think you are, but there you are.
I wasn't.
Well, we'll start again, shall we? Or else you can use that if you want.
No, I don't think they'll want that.
Start again.
It was a genuine question.
Well, I won't mention it then. There wasn't a fucking penalty in the game. There wasn't one of those ridiculous situations in the game. That didn't happen. So let's just talk about our performance.
Roy, a satisfying day at the office?
Yeah, I thought we played very well.
First half, particularly, it was a pretty even contest, did you not feel?
Not particularly, no. I thought we had the better of the first half, and I thought we had clearly the better of the second half.
Any decisions in the game that you weren't happy with?
No, we've already been through that. We went through that before you've restarted the interview, so I'm not prepared to talk about decisions. If people who watch the television can't see what decision I'm talking about, then let's forget about it.
So that was Wilson upset after a game. Now, Gary, talking people through it, because you were stood there just off camera at this point, knowing that you were going to ask him questions next. How were you feeling at that moment?
Oh man, that was weird. That was West Brom against Bolton in 2011, and the only time that we have to do the interviews are when it's a BBC outside broadcast. So there's no Sky reporter there. We just do the interviews. So obviously, because it's a BBC outside broadcast, the BBC do their interview first. So that was Ivan Gaskell, who, as we all know, is a brilliant reporter, very professional, great guy. But he rubbed Roy up the wrong way. I think the context is the week before, Roy with West Brom had been on the end of a penalty decision, which he really didn't agree with. And this was a very similar situation. I actually thought it really was a penalty, by the way. Roy's argument was it's a foul, yes, but because it's inside the box, for it to be a penalty, it needs to be a bit more than a foul. Obviously, that's not quite how the rules work, but that's how he saw it at the time. So Roy came in. He was actually in a very good mood. They hadn't lost. I think they drew. We were talking about the other results. And then that one question from Ivan just rubbed him up the wrong way. And all the time, I'm standing about 3 feet away thinking, great, I've now got to go next. And you have just completely rubbed him up the wrong way. But amazingly, he pulled himself together and he was as good as gold with me. You would never have known that was the same guy who had given that interview. And by the way, Ivan was rightly furious because they couldn't use any of that interview. I think they ended up using our interview. Correct me if I'm wrong. It was Match of the Day, obviously. I think they had to use our interview because obviously they couldn't use that with all the swearing and one-word answers. So there's always the risk of that happening. And actually, it's got worse because back then there was no time limit on the interviews. Managers could come out an hour later or more. Now it has, for Premier League rules, it has to be done by I think 5:30, managers and players. So quite often you get down there and the managers are waiting, or one manager will be waiting to do the interview. So you've got very little time to think about questions. You've just got to go in and do it. And so obviously, if they've just been on the end of a dodgy decision in the last minute, they are raging, and you've always got to be very much have that in mind. And just, well, you've just got to ask questions which are going to result in them talking. It's not about you. What's your assessment of the performance? Talk us through your feelings about that, rather than focusing on something which is going to wind them up. You learn very quickly.
Oh, absolutely. I know what that's like. So you mentioned obviously you were there at that point with Roy Hodgson. Were you in Ivan Gaskell's shoes at another point though at all, where you were asking the questions and the manager was getting a little frosty with you?
I remember one time with Harry Redknapp, who I always got on really well with, but there was a game, I think it was Boxing Day, when he was at Tottenham, and he came in, and this time I'm pretty sure it was a Sky game, and I was still doing the interviews, and he came in, and I just said, "Good afternoon, Harry," and he just went, "What's good about it?" And I just went, and he just said, "Come on, effing get on with it." And I just thought, this is not going to go well. And I think the interview lasted about 60 seconds. But that wasn't me. I mean, that was just down to the fact that he was absolutely raging that they'd had a bad result. It does happen. Once or twice I had interviews with David Moyes, which were frosty to say the least. But, you know, again, you've got to contextualize it. You meet these guys away from a match day and they're totally different people. They are, you know, elite managers for whom winning is everything. And you're speaking to them 10 minutes after the final whistle. Quite clearly, they're not always going to be in the best of moods. And you've just got to accept that. That can be tough.
Absolutely. And, you know, from a manager's point of view, I understand they get asked questions pre-match press conference, post-match press conference, post-match report. Straight away, they're asked questions all the time by the media. At some point, of course, they're going to crash and maybe say something they wouldn't normally say. And unfortunately,
but also they're asked the same thing so many times. You're right. So I'll do an interview. BBC will do an interview. Then they'll do a radio interview. So there'll be TalkSport 5 Live. Then they'll do a local radio interview. Then they'll do a piece with the Sunday newspapers. Then they'll do a piece with the Monday newspapers. Then they'll do a general press conference. They might even have to do overseas TV. So and all of those people will ask the same things.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Listen, there's only so much sympathy because, you know, it is part of their job and they're well paid to do it. But I'm sure there are times where they just think, "Oh my God, have I got to answer this question 12 times before I can leave this stadium?"
The thing is, if you're a reporter and you're asking the question, sometimes you're embarrassed about asking it, knowing that he's answered it already 3 or 4 times, but you know you've got to ask it. It's
you're not doing your job if you don't.
Absolutely, you're not. Now, you mentioned those moments back in the commentary booth. Any moments stand out? Memorable moments, memorable highlights of your career? What's been that one game or a couple of games that you've done where you look back and you're really, really proud of?
Yeah, God, there've been a few.
Probably not the semi-final of the Bud House.
No, I'm not going to recall that one. No. I'm afraid. I certainly can't remember the score in that.
I've forgotten it too.
If I think about, go back to my radio days, there was the brilliant Champions League battles between Liverpool and Chelsea. You know, Mourinho, Benitez. They weren't actually great games, but certainly the loudest I've ever experienced a match was at Anfield with Luis Garcia's ghost goal when it was 1-0. Incredible. I remember we were on air an hour beforehand, and my producer back at Stamford Bridge said in my ear, "Gary, got to turn down the effects mic. We can't hear you." I said, "There isn't an effects mic. All you're hearing is my headset and Kerry Dixon's headset. There's nothing else." And he said, "You are being drowned out by the fans." And that's the only time in my radio career where that happened. And I think I listened back to some of it the next day, and there are parts where you just can't even hear us because the crowd is so loud. So I'll always remember that. I'll always remember my second season with Sky. I did Portsmouth against Reading, which no one anticipated being a classic. And of course, it's still the highest scoring game in Premier League history, 7-4. I can't watch it because the commentary is so bad. I mean, I was still very wet behind the ears at that stage. But obviously, I'll never forget the game. One that I do like watching is Tottenham beating Wigan 9-1. and there were 8 goals in the second half, 5 goals for Jermaine Defoe. That was brilliant. A few others, Dele Alli's goal at Selhurst Park, the famous twist and volley. I love that one. I always get people messaging me about that goal. And then, funnily enough, I tweeted it the other day, Jordan Ayew's goal on Boxing Day against West Ham this season. That's one that people often message me about. So there's an awful lot. I mean, look, we all know there's an awful lot of bad games as well. You'll cover a lot of average games, a lot of poor quality games, which once they're done, you'll never remember them. But there'll always be those matches where, it was really, really memorable. And there's certainly some of the ones that stand out for sure.
Do you listen back to your commentary regularly?
No, I don't have time. I mean, in the early days, I obviously did, because it's the only way you can get better. But quite often I'll be doing 5 or 6 games a week now. So once a game is done, it's finished as far as I'm concerned. It's gone, I've got to move on to the next one. The only time I'll hear it is if I happen to have Sky Sports News on and you hear it then, and you'll say, "Oh, that's me." But no, I don't have time to sit and watch games that I've done. I'll tell a lie. I might watch goals on Sunday, and obviously that's a 2 or 3 minute edit where it'll be me and the co-pilot.
And what does it feel like? What does it feel like listening to yourself back?
Obviously you get used to it after 15 years. But it is still like, wow, I'm doing what 14-year-old me always dreamed of doing, and that is a fantastic feeling. I always feel I wish I'd said that, or I wish I hadn't said that, or maybe if I'd said this. And I am really self-critical. I think all commentators are, but there's always that nice feeling where you do feel you've got it right. On those rare occasions and you hear it, it is really fantastic to know I'm doing the job I always wanted to do, and occasionally I can do it okay.
And 14-year-old Gary Taphouse in 2020, what advice would you give him?
Ditch the NHS glasses, first of all, because they ain't cool. Sort out your barnet as well, because that certainly isn't cool. But yeah, what I would say is, and well, several things actually. When you move from radio to TV, remember that you're on TV and you don't have to talk all the time, because it took me a very long time to understand that. When you're a young TV commentator, you think, well, I'm being paid to talk here, so I need to talk. And actually, silence is golden. And sometimes not talking is better than anything you can actually say. And I wish I'd learned that a lot sooner. But also just I would have said, don't put so much pressure on yourself, because we all know what a competitive industry it is, and enjoy it. There's so much about our job which you should just enjoy, and that's what I do now. I still have very high standards. I work harder than ever, but I'm able to just enjoy it now. I don't feel nervous and tense anymore. I just, fortunately, football's a very sociable job. Those first 3 hours, when you get to a ground, it's a great chance to catch up with people and have a chat and a gossip, and when they find out what's going on elsewhere, and that's brilliant. I love all of that. But again, it took me quite a long time to enjoy that side of it, because I was so focused on the game. It's a great job. It's a brilliant job. It really is, if you like football.
I was going to say, yeah, if you don't like football, it's a bit difficult.
Not recommended.
No, probably not. And what are stigmas that a lot of people probably say about commentators? What an easy job. They just talk about football. Put it to bed now, Gary. I know how hard you work behind the scenes. What sort of preparation do you have to do for each game that you commentate on? And let's use a specific game. Let's throw you in with a Champions League qualifier or a Europa League qualifier, because I know you've done them before, where who knows who these players are. You have to find out. You have to know. Well,
also this season I did Crawley Town against Colchester in the Carabao Cup, when the winner had a place in the quarterfinals. That was 2 League Two teams that I had never watched before in my life. And yeah, that is a lot of work. That involves ringing up the clubs, talking to the press officers, trying to get some pen picks, trying to maybe even talk to the players, if anyone's willing to do so, or the managers. But I usually allow a full day of prep for each game, because 80% of it you won't use, but you have to be prepared for every eventuality. You need to know when the reserve right back's last goal was. He may never have scored, or it might have been 300 games since he last scored. It's extremely unlikely that he's either going to get on the pitch, never mind score, but he might score in the last minute. You need to know. So, you have to be prepared to the nth degree. There are 23 bits of information I have on every player, right down to how to pronounce their name, nationality, number of caps, last goal, record against the team he's playing, birthday, you name it. I have all of that on every player, and then a similar amount on the referee, both managers, and then a whole list of stuff on each team. And like I say, I won't need the vast majority of that, but it's just in case. You just have to have it just in case. So that's the prep. When people say to me, what do you do for the rest of the week? I really just laugh, because I mean, as I say, I might be doing 5 games in a week. So there's your week for you. And even if I'm only doing 2 or 3, there's still an absolute mountain of preparation to do for each one. So there you go. That's where my time goes.
But Gary, you've always got time for Twitter, haven't you?
Always. Well, the thing is, that is a tool. That is a research tool, because you can see what fans and fanzine guys are saying about their team, and what fans replying to them are saying. So I do like to get the fans' perspective as well, because that is just as important. If what you're saying is going completely against the grain of what many fans are saying, then you look like an idiot. So I do like to know what fans are thinking. But also, yeah, I will find time to scroll and see what's going on in the world.
And tweet some witty comments as well.
Well, as you know, I'm really not that funny, but occasionally there might be a flash of inspiration.
I don't know. I disagree. Gary, thanks for joining me. Anybody watching right now wants to follow Gary on Twitter and see some of his witty tweets. At Gary Taphouse is his Twitter handle. And I would like to find anybody out there who's had a worse second day's work for a company than what Gary described. Truly staggering. It really was. Gary, thanks very much, mate. And we'll chat soon.